Have you taken a look at your gas bill lately? If you have, you've probably felt that little shock to your wallet. Well, you are not alone. That cooking gas cylinder in your kitchen is right at the heart of a huge global story. We're going to connect the dots for you, from a conflict thousands of miles away, straight to your monthly budget. Let's get into it.
It all starts with this number, 60 rupees. It feels like it happened overnight, right? The price of a domestic cooking gas cylinder just jumped, sending a little shockwave through households all across the country.
So here's what actually happened. On March 7th, the change was made official. Domestic cylinders shot up by 60 rupees. But for businesses, restaurants and small shops, the hit was even bigger. Commercial cylinders jumped by a pretty steep 115 rupees. But this isn't just about the numbers on a bill. It's about real people. This quote from a homemaker in Uttar Pradesh, it really captures the sense of panic. When the official supply gets tight, a black market pops up, and people are forced to pay these crazy prices for something they absolutely need, especially during a time like Ramzan. So how in the world did we get here? First, we'll look at the shock right here at home. Then we'll zoom out to a critical choke point that's under fire. After that, we'll trace India's energy lifeline, see the ripple effects of all this, and finally, look at what's being done to secure our supply. All right, let's start with what you're feeling most directly. The price you're now seeing on your bill. And this price hike is very real, no matter where you are. Just look at the major cities, Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai. In Delhi, for example, the price went from 853 all the way past that 900 rupee mark to 913. That's not a small change for any family to just absorb. But look, this price hike didn't just happen out of nowhere. To really get why your bill went up, we have to look thousands of miles away, to a distant spark that lit this whole fire. And here it is. This is the direct connection. There's a military conflict happening in West Asia, and it's sent shockwaves through the entire global energy market. It's raised shipping costs, insurance costs. It's just created massive uncertainty. And that leads directly to the price hike we're seeing right here in India. The absolute epicenter of all this disruption is right here, the Strait of Hormuz. Think of it like a giant highway for oil and gas, okay? But it's an incredibly narrow one. A huge percentage of the world's energy has to squeeze through this tiny passage. So when this choke point is threatened, the entire global supply chain just tenses up. Okay, so now let's talk about why a problem in this one specific spot is such a massive deal for India's energy lifeline. This chart, well, it shows a pretty big vulnerability. India uses a ton of LPG, cooking gas. But the thing is, we don't produce enough ourselves to keep up with demand. Over half of it, a staggering 58%, is imported. And that dependency, that's where the problem really starts. And this is where that vulnerability becomes crystal clear. An unbelievable 80% of all the LPG India imports has to pass through that one single choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. And it's not just LPG. Look at our crude oil and LNG imports. They also depend heavily on this one route. Our energy security is overwhelmingly tied to this one narrow strip of water. So let's connect all the dots, right? A conflict in the Persian Gulf disrupts the Strait of Hormuz. That chokes off the supply of LPG that India is so heavily dependent on. And the direct result of all that? The kitchens of over 330 million Indian households are suddenly at risk. It's a straight line. Now, a threat to the supply chain doesn't just stay on paper. It creates a very real ripple effect that turns a global conflict into a local crisis felt all across the country. And this has led to two very different stories being told. On one hand, you have the official line. The petroleum minister has assured everyone that supplies are stable. But then you look at what's happening on the ground. A report from the Economic Times shows hotel associations in Bengaluru warning that they have to shut down because their commercial LPG supply has been cut. The reality on the ground has been chaotic, to say the least. There's been panic buying, long queues, and it's all fueling a black market where desperate people are paying huge markups. And it's not just homes. With commercial supplies suspended, businesses are being forced to shut down. The shortage is even hitting essential services. To try and stop hoarding, the government has even had to extend the waiting period for new cylinder bookings. So with panic starting to spread and supplies looking shaky, the government had to act, and act fast. So what kind of emergency measures are they taking to handle this? Well, the main tool they've used is something called the Essential Commodities Act of 1955. This is basically an emergency power that lets the government take control of the production, supply, and distribution of essential items. And right now, cooking gas is at the top of that list.
Using that act set off a really clear four-step plan for the oil refineries. First, make as much LPG as you possibly can. Second, make sure households get their supply first, above all else. Third, take key ingredients like propane and butane and divert them into making more cooking gas. And finally, number 4, ration the supply to commercial users, which, by the way, is exactly why those hotels and restaurants are facing shutdowns.
Now, the good news is India isn't completely defenseless here. The country has strategic fuel reserves, which act as a critical cushion for about 50 days. And looking ahead, there are efforts to diversify where we get our energy from, like a new deal to import more LPG from the United States, which should hopefully reduce our over-reliance on the Middle East. These are all really necessary short-term fixes. They help manage the immediate problem, for sure. But what this whole episode has really done is shine a massive spotlight on a fundamental, deep-seated vulnerability right at the heart of India's energy security. And that leaves us with this final, really critical question. This crisis at the Strait of Hormuz, it's been a wake-up call. Just relying on emergency measures and quick fixes isn't a real strategy for the future. So what is the long-term solution? How do we actually secure the energy needs of 1.4 billion people and protect our kitchens from the next global shock? Because you know there will be one.